It's Toronto's podcast on the Canada's Podcast Network.
So Fawn, welcome. And for those that don't know, Fawn and I have known each other for a long time. Let's say it like that, Fawn.
Very kind.
Fawn, for everyone else, tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do, in that sort of, 2 or 3 minute kind of capsule.
Sure. Well, I guess the reason you think I'm an entrepreneur is because I have owned multiple businesses.
Yeah.
And I've always basically been in the technology communication side of the business.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, for the last 25 years, I've been running Canada's #1 publishing media company for technology.
Yeah.
And approximately 8 years ago, we went through a digital transformation and became a digital media company from a more traditional publisher. And then also launched into an advertising agency, a digital advertising agency for the technology sector.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, technology is everywhere, so it's not just IT, but it's anyone who is using technology to enable the business.
So the question I ask right at the beginning usually is, do you think entrepreneurs are wired differently?
Yes, they are. They're wired differently because most or many people are risk averse who are working for inside corporations.
Mm-hmm.
And there's two terms. There's entrepreneurs and there are infopreneurs. And there are a lot of people who are amazingly creative working within corporations.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason we call them infopreneurs is because they have a safety net around them.
Right.
And that safety net makes all the difference versus an entrepreneur that, like a person who's an acrobat but has no net. That's kind of the difference. And that's why they have to have a higher tolerance for risk in order to put themselves out and attempt to make something of nothing.
Yeah, that's right. So what made you decide to become an entrepreneur?
I think basically my father was an entrepreneur, and it was the way I was brought up.
Mm-hmm.
So he never worked for a major corporation. Even when he was working for Encyclopedia Britannica, which took him around the world, it was up to him, and he didn't get paid unless he built his own direct sales organization.
Yeah. I remember that. I remember that group. Yeah.
So I think that's probably was my leaning. And I had, after graduating, some experience with working with corporations, and I didn't like being told how to do things, especially when I felt.
I'm saying nothing. Okay.
Yeah. that was me as a young person, and which really led me into having my own business. The first business I created, I was 24 years old, and it was an animation studio. So I went straight into opening my own businesses. Later on, I worked for large corporations, but it was mainly under contract.
So how did you get into your area of expertise, publishing, digital, IT?
Well, my degree, first of all, my degree was in business and communications.
Okay.
So my intent was always to be a communications specialist.
Mm-hmm.
What happened was that I met one of your former partners early on.
Okay.
And I had been approached after the animation studio. I was working with a lot of advertising agencies.
Mm-hmm.
So one person had left the agency and had picked up a software package out of Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a graphic arts software package. And he had come to me and said, look, you're really, really creative. I need you to help me launch a software package in Canada. And I said, I know nothing about technology. He said, but you know about marketing. He says, that's all you need to know. So, work with me. So I looked at it. I did research. I found that McLean Hunter at the time had the largest, or used to have the largest graphic arts magazine.
Mm-hmm.
That was this thick at its height. And now it was this thick. So I went to the publisher. And I said, look, I have an offer for you. It's called desktop publishing. I said, it's brand new. I said, nobody really knows about it. I said, but your core advertisers are getting into it, like CompuGraphic, Linotype, etc.
Mhm.
I said, I need somebody who's going to support me from a media perspective in order for us to launch what I think would work, and that would be a trade show. I said, are you interested? So we worked out a deal, and he was very interested because he knew that he couldn't just keep going to the Heidelbergs of the world and keep that magazine going.
Right.
So he gave me huge support, and I launched the first desktop publishing event in Canada at what was a Triumph Hotel at Kiel and 401. And what happened was there were so many people that came over from the Ministry of Transportation, they had to call the fire department.
I remember that. I was there.
Yeah. So it was humongous, right? It was a
Yeah.
huge success. And then I was approached by one of your ex-partners saying, you know, there's this new thing coming out called Unix, and you should get involved. And I was going to England, and he introduced me to the CIO of Northern Telecom, who was the president of the Uniform Association in the UK.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Took him out for lunch. It was the most expensive lunch I've ever had to this day in my entire life. And but he introduced me to every important person in that sector of Unix operators. And when I came back to Canada, they had just formed Uniform Canada. So I signed them up to a 10-year deal, and I launched into the trade show business. That's kind of how it happened.
Mm-hmm.
But in the first 6 months, I remember I'd go and I'd be selling the show, and I'd have to sit in front of these brilliant people with all these hundreds of acronyms. I had no idea what they were talking about, but I learned to nod my head and look intelligent.
Yeah.
And finally, I started to understand what it was.
Well, sort of what I call planned opportunity, you know.
Exactly. That's how I got into it.
Yeah. So
and how did I get into publishing?
Yeah.
Well, at some point I decided, to try and sell the trade shows, and I went into business with a new partner who had just left a company called Sequent Computers. Mark Turner originally was with Sun Microsystems. And we felt there was a huge market for chief information officers. So we created a conference, a retreat called CIO Survival Camps. And we would charge the CIOs to come out to Quebec. We had a beautiful in Montebello, and it was $4,000 per CIO. We got Sun to sponsor it with their partners.
Mm-hmm.
And we did this for 3 years, and then I got approached by IT World Canada, which was Laurentian Media at the time, because they wanted to form an executive division. And they needed somebody who knew what they were doing. So they said, would you come on board for a 1-year contract? And that's kind of how I got to what is now IT World Canada.
So just moving away from a little bit, we're both in Toronto, or Greater Toronto, if you like.
Yeah.
And you've been here pretty much, all
Most of my life, yeah.
Most of your life. Why Toronto? What's the benefit of doing business in Toronto?
Well, first of all, it's the largest city in Canada. It's got more corporate offices. It's where the technology headquarters are. The headquarters, or majority of offices in Ottawa, as an example, are there specifically for the federal government.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. So that would be the public sector team that's in Ottawa. And we did a lot of events in Ottawa too, right across the country. But Toronto has the most opportunity for drumming up business. It just does.
Just to sort of from your side, some of our best ideas, come when we least expect them. Is there any, how do you disconnect? How do you recharge? How do you get those ideas out? I mean, you've come up with some great ideas. I mean, as I said, it's not like we don't know.
Usually they happen because of a circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
When it's not planned, like when you, like there's 2 different types of ideas. There's one that is, you have a vision, you have a purpose, and you're setting out to do that. And then by setting out to do that, through the people you meet and the things you discover, you basically formulate, okay, here's an opportunity, here's, here's an idea that we can apply. And sometimes it's just circumstance. So I'll give you an example. I was with IT World at that time, and I had created my first master series around networking.
Mm-hmm.
And so my idea, because of the type of person I am, I'm a driver, I said, you know what, I'm going to call up the federal government. I'm going to ask them to send me an auditor, because I think this material is so important, they should be auditing it for their people. So I did, and sure enough, they did send down an auditor from Treasury Board. And the audience at the time, almost half of the people coming in were CIOs from municipalities. So they heard this gentleman was down from Treasury Board, and they accosted him in the hall, because the federal government had been at that point sitting down with the province to talk about how they could get e-government to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And they accosted him because they weren't at the table. So they literally had him pinned to the wall, and I'm walking through to see where the coffee is. I see my guest pinned to the wall by these 4 CIOs. And I went in because it was an altercation. I went, whoa, hold on, guys. So I set them down, asked them what the problem was. And they said, well, we're not at the table. They're doing all this, and all those services they want to talk about, we're the ones who deliver it. So I looked at the gentleman from Treasury Board. I said, well, is there any way that we could have the federal government sit down with municipalities? I could be the person that arranges that, the facilitator. And they went, well, we couldn't do that without the provinces on board. So one of the CIOs was from the city of Toronto, and he turned around and he says, well, I happen to know the CIO for the province of Ontario, Fawn. I will get us a lunch. I said, great. So the gentleman from the Treasury Board said, well, if you can get Ontario and Quebec on board, he says, then I can move this forward. So I met with the CIO, and it was a great meeting, and he basically looked at me as if I was Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. And he said, I'll tell you what, you bring me the CIO of Quebec, the CIO of BC, the CIO of Alberta, and you've got Ontario. So what did I do? Called up the CIO of Quebec, and I said, by the way, we're doing this with the federal government, and I have the CIO of Ontario. You should be there.
Yeah.
And of course, he went on, then BC went on, then Alberta went on, then Manitoba went on, went right across the country. And that's how we launched the Lac Carling series, which did tremendous stuff for our country. Yeah. And it really did move the government file forward.
What are you most excited about in business today? I mean, you've lived through such change.
Yeah.
In the way you.
Well, I think that what I'm very excited about is that we are moving from the information age where you and I grew up in, from a business perspective, into the experience age. Yeah. And that is completely different. The models change. Everyone's going to be disrupted. I mean, we were disrupted early because we're a publisher.
Right.
This is every business, big and small, is about to go through what I went through for the last 8 years. And it's very exciting because you got so many forces coming together at the same time, from AI, artificial intelligence, to the Internet of Things, 5G to fuel all of this growth, and really allow us to get to a new level of how society is going to work. So, we're working in this microcosm called a business, but it's all being impacted societally by all these different forces, and we're helping to shape and influence those things. And that's really what I'm excited about at this point in my career.
So where's publishing going to be in the next 5 years? Yeah.
I think that it's not going to be how we viewed publishing in the past. It really is, publishing is about bringing that information to life. It's really about how does the reader or the person that's consuming the information, how do they experience it? And I think
it's about the experience as well. I think people can get the data. It's what's around it that really
exactly, and that I think is the next level.
So, I mean, is there anything just now that you get really annoyed at that's, our term is a fad just now, that you think people should just leave the heck alone? In business, that is.
Yeah, okay. I think that, there are financial nuances that really bother me, and especially as a woman, as a woman entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
And I have far less opportunity than my counterparts who are males.
Yeah.
Even though I own this company, and even though I've been very lucky to be able to finance it, but that's because it has a long longevity, right?
Right.
Been around long enough where the banks feel secure and the receivables are high enough to do that.
Yeah.
If I was starting out, it would be a whole different situation. So it annoys me that we haven't made much progress, on the diversity inclusion agenda for business, especially female entrepreneurs. Like when you look at equity funding, they receive less than 2%. No, that's just not right. When 50% of the ideas are coming from women and they're just overlooked because of their gender, that's wrong.
What are the top 3 things on your bucket list at the moment?
My bucket list? Well, one of the things is to be able to pass the reins to someone else so that I can do more traveling. Because I look at your lifestyle and I'm really jealous.
Don't tell everybody that.
I'm still, very operational.
Yeah.
So I think that's the big thing, because once I can hand over the reins and really just be a CEO rather than an operational president, I can do all the things that I want to do at this age.
You faced a few challenges. I mean, I've known and talked to you about some of them. What's the greatest challenge you faced in the business to date?
Well, the greatest challenge that we faced was that our product was no longer viewed as being valuable. And that was the greatest challenge I faced. That was, we had a whole business around printed magazines. And that was our disruption, was that we had to then recognize, okay, what had changed, because there was magazines still being printed that were of value in different parts of the world. The U.S., because of its volume, although the magazine wasn't where it was financially, like from a revenue-driven point of view, it still was sought after. But it didn't, because Canada is so small and our market is so small, really, we have to understand that the people we sell to are mainly sales driven versus brand driven. So when you're sales driven, it's all about return on investment, improving it. So it's hard to prove what a printed magazine is doing from a metric driven point of view versus a digital point of view. So that was the first thing we had to change. And then we also had to understand that our model was we pushed out information. That was a model for many decades. And now all of a sudden, that was not the model anymore. So what we had to do was examine what is valuable, like what is a valuable asset. And we finally realized that the most valuable asset is the customer. So, we had to rethink and redo everything so that the emphasis was on the customer and not on what we thought our product or service, was.
If you knew now what you knew then, what would you recommend to people starting up in business? Because you've got a great track record, Can you pass on 2 or 3 gems to
Sure.
the audience?
I would say that the first thing you have to do is really understand the true value of your organization. And in order to do that, you need to pose three questions. You know, number one, what are you passionate about? Number two, what can you beat the world at? And number three, what are the metrics that are going to drive your economic engine? So if you can, you know, really figure out those three questions, then you're off to a great start.
What's the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
The best piece of advice that I ever received. That's a hard question, because nobody ever said just go where your heart is, Fawn, or you know, just follow what you're passionate about. Except when I went to university, that was a bit different, because you're taking what you're passionate about and you're leaving.
It's the sort of thing. I mean, I remember one of my early mentors. I used to be a terribly sloppy worker, you know, and said, you know, tidy desk, tidy mind. And then he qualified it by, and if it's not tidy, I'm going to kick you out, basically. Yeah. But it really taught me organization and you know, being that kind of thing.
Right. So then, very simply, the best advice I ever got was, do it now.
Yeah.
So you know, don't procrastinate, because the easiest thing to do is procrastinate on the stuff you don't like to do. Right?
So we're going to go to some rapid fire questions. Okay. So don't think too much about them. Just go for it. If you weren't doing what you were doing now, what would you be doing instead?
I would be teaching.
Okay. Yeah, I could see that. I could see that. What book are you currently reading? And you know, is there a couple of books that you would recommend that really kind of had an impact on you?
Well, let me show you something.
Okay.
This is a book we just finished writing.
Oh, I know that. Yes, I saw that. Yeah.
So, you know, I would highly recommend.
Right there. And I mean, in terms of reading, anything that really kind of influenced the way you operate?
Oh, I think that Tom Collins has really influenced the way I operate. Michael Copeland has been amazing, and a lot of the pieces from those books actually became part of our strategy.
Yeah.
You know, within our transformation.
Okay.
But there's a lot of great authors. Unfortunately, you know, in this last month, I haven't read, because I've been heads down on P&L and putting the budget.
I know that. I know that feeling.
Yeah. But I would say that I mainly read business books. I really haven't read any fiction in a few years. I haven't had time.
I still read fiction. I'd like to fit my fiction in.
Yeah.
Are you a morning or a night person?
I'm definitely a morning person.
Yeah.
I'm a morning person. When I was young, I used to be a night person.
When do you kick into gear in the morning?
Around 5:30.
Okay. Yeah. If you had to pick one word to describe yourself, maybe two, okay, what would it be and why?
Driver. I'm a driver.
Yeah, I know you are. Anything keeping you up at night?
Everything keeps me up at night. That's at first I thought it was because I thought too much, and then suddenly I realized, you know, part of it is my age too. It's keeping me up at night. But I think that you get these ideas and they come at a strange time. I don't know about you, but I always have something by my bedside if some thought comes in and I'm up.
Yep.
Now. Yep. I don't use the mobile because I don't want to wake up my husband because the light comes on or something goes wrong. Mm-hmm. But what keeps you up at night? It just depends on what's going on in the business. If there's, you know, operational issues, it's keeping me up at night. If there's something we're trying to figure out strategically, it's keeping me up at night. But I try to shut it down.
Yeah.
Try to shut it down.
What's your most favorite place in the world? You've traveled, so.
Yep, I have. And I would, believe it or not, one of my most favorite places in the world is England. I love the UK.
Mhm.
I got great memories there.
Mhm.
I'm going back there, next week, and it's not just England. I mean, Scotland's gorgeous.
Thank you.
It's just I just love being in a country where you can have millions of people around you at the same time. You could have the beautiful hills of Wales and the fantastic scenery, and it's very important to me to get to the ocean.
So we do. This is, you haven't listened, but this question I ask everyone, and
Okay.
it's sort of still in the travel side of things.
Okay.
It's the last question. So there's a small tropical island in the middle of the ocean with only one phone booth. Remember, a phone booth.
A phone booth.
Yeah, and no internet. Okay. We drop you off there with no technology at all. At any time, you can pick up the phone in the phone booth and call the boat to come back and pick you up. How long would you last before making that call?
Oh, I would say probably about 2 hours.
Yeah, I know that feeling. Yeah, I know that feeling. That's about it, Fawn. I mean, it's been great seeing you. As it always is, and thank you for coming on the Canada's podcast.
Oh, thank
you.
you.
I think your experience. Where can our listeners find you online in case they, we have people that might want to follow up and get your
Sure.
opinion.
Well, LinkedIn, it's strictly at Fawn Annan. People have problems with my name, so it's like a baby deer, Fawn, last name Annan.
Mhm.
I know lots of people just don't know how to pronounce that. But also, they can go to our websites, any one of our websites, whether it's itwellcanada.com or itbusiness.ca, and find us there.
Okay. Thanks again, and hope you enjoyed the interview.
Thank you. It was great, Phil. Lovely.